Good evening. Tonight, our presentation is about reading and our plans for ensuring that all students are able to read at a proficient level by the end of third grade. We have several objectives for this presentation. The first one is to understand ELI, which is the Early Literacy Implementation Law, and its implications. The second objective is to understand the intervention process. The third objective is to understand current district data and goals. And the final objective is to discuss plans moving forward with regards to reading intervention for struggling learners. So we'll go ahead and get started. First thing we're going to discuss is why we're concerned with reading success in the first place. The big question here is, why is reading important? According to the research, reading is the skill that makes virtually all other learning possible. Without reading, our students won't be able to be successful in subjects like science, social studies, and mathematics. For all of those subjects, they have to read the material, and if they are unable to read, then they will struggle with the material for those classes. Second, the inability to read has been listed as a health risk by the National Institutes of Health, which is NIH. The data that we'll go over in a moment shows that students who cannot read are at risk of not being able to get as good of jobs, and therefore they will live in poverty and not have the resources that they would otherwise have if they were able to read. Finally, the ability to read is a critical factor in living a healthy, happy, and productive life. So one of our goals as a district is that we prepare our students for post-secondary lives, whether that's education or the workforce. And we want our students to live a happy, healthy, and productive life once they leave our building in our district. So we need to ensure that our students have the tools necessary to do that, which reading is one of those top skills. The data shows that 44% of Americans don't read. This isn't just on a day-to-day basis, this is on a yearly basis. So that means 44% of Americans don't read within any given year. Within that, 50% of adults can't read at an 8th grade level. So given a text written at an 8th grade level, 50% of adults will not be able to understand that material. 45 million people read below a 5th grade level, and 44 million adults aren't able to read a simple story to their children. As we've discussed in the previous slide, reading is so essential for future success, and we know as well that students who have parents who read at them with home is important. So when 44 million adults aren't able to read a story to their children, that trickles down to their children, and that number will only grow in the future unless we do something about it now. Continuing with the data, 50% of people cannot read prescription drug labels or other simple tasks that they need in order to understand things and live in our world today. And when people can't read prescription drug labels, then they might not understand the side effects, they might not understand how they're supposed to take their medication, which is really terrifying to think about. 60% of households don't buy books on a yearly basis. So 60% of the houses in America have no new books for their children every year. 75% of people on welfare cannot read. Finally, illiteracy costs taxpayers about $20 billion per year. That's a huge cost based just on not being able to read. So if we can find a way to counter the illiteracy problem that we clearly have, then we could save a lot of money. So we're going to move into talking about early literacy implementation, which from now on I will refer to as ELI now. The first question is, what is ELI? ELI is aimed at creating proficient readers by the end of third grade. So it affects kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students and teachers. It uses evidence-based instruction and assessment to reach that goal of creating proficient readers. Implementation began in August 2014, and it has shifted and been changed to adapt to what schools need and what the data is showing between then and now. It's also been rolled out slowly, so school districts are expected to meet different requirements at different points over the last 3 years. The requirements of ELI are that universal screening is performed in kindergarten, first, second, and third grades, as well as progress monitoring throughout the year. Teachers are also required to have a 90-minute instructional block for literacy every day, and communication with parents is required for students who are struggling, are not proficient on the universal screening, and communication is required to show progress with those students who are struggling. So that way parents can be informed how their students are doing, and they understand where their students are at, what their students are struggling with. And that allows the parents to become true partners in the educational process and do what they can to help their students become proficient readers. There are 2 additional requirements that will be beginning in May of this year. And the first one is an evidence-based summer reading program for students who are not proficient based on the universal screeners that school districts use. So these students will be required to attend a summer reading program where they will work on intensive instruction that is, again, evidence-based to help them continue to build their skills and hopefully reach proficiency by the end of their third grade school year. And if students are not proficient on those universal screeners and they do not attend the summer reading program, or they just aren't recommended to continue on, then they will be retained in the third grade. So at the end of third grade, if the student is not a proficient reader, they will be required to be retained and repeat the third grade so that they have more time with the universal screeners and progress monitoring to become a proficient reader. So now we're going to talk about universal screening because I know that that's an educational term that you may not be familiar with. What is universal screening? Universal screening is the first step in identifying the students who are at risk for learning difficulties. They're short assessments that focus on specific skills. So that could be phonological awareness or fluency or comprehension. There are different assessments that focus on different skills and are given to the students throughout the year, and the data will show whether the students are proficient on that specific skill or not. And the most important thing to know about universal screening is that it's just an indicator. So it's the first step in identifying the students who are at risk. There's a lot more work to be done after those students are identified, but it's where we begin with the process of identifying those students and getting them the support that they need to become proficient readers. So the universal screener that we use is the FAST assessment. We give it 3 times throughout the year, once in the fall, once in the winter, and once in the spring. So that gives snapshots at different points in the year after students have learned and gone through interventions and gone through whatever instructional strategies the teacher has taught them. And after these assessments are given, the teachers analyze the data during their PLC meetings and during professional development days. So when they look at the data, they look at whether each student is proficient or not proficient, and they look at students who are close to being proficient or close to being not proficient. They look on both sides of that proficiency percentage, and they group students based on how they do on that assessment so that they can give the most effective instruction to their students. So currently our data on our third graders indicates that 76% of third grade students are proficient. That means that 24% of our third graders are not proficient and need the extra support. So this data alone shows that we need some sort of support because almost a quarter of our students are not proficient and need some sort of support in order to become proficient readers. So now we'll move into progress monitoring and what that is. So progress monitoring is assessments given to track student progress and to group students for interventions. These are ongoing. They differ from the universal screener because they're given more frequently. So the screener is our indicator that, hey, something might be wrong, and then the progress monitor tells us how the students are doing on a more frequent basis. So they provide ongoing and timely feedback as to how well individual students are responding to teaching. So universal screeners are given 3 times a year, which isn't very much if you think about throughout the year and how that's spaced out. And we need a way to tell throughout the year between those screeners if what we're providing students with is working or if we need to make adjustments to our instruction. And we do that through progress monitoring. And now we'll discuss reading intervention, what that is, and what that looks like in our district. Reading intervention is an approach to meet the needs of struggling readers. There are 3 tiers of the typical intervention. The first tier is the general education curriculum, which is 80 to 90% of your students. That's down here at the bottom. The second tier is the students who need explicit instruction, so they need more individualized instruction, one-on-one or in small groups with the teacher. That's typically your at-risk or English learning students. And the third tier is the students who need intensive instruction. So they need more than what they're getting in the classroom. They need more than that small group instruction or one-on-one instruction. They need an entirely different curriculum as well as the curriculum they're receiving in the classroom. This is a small group of students, only 1 to 5% of your students. Usually it's your special ed students, but it's not necessarily always your special ed students. English language students can also be in this group if they are not successful at your tier 2 interventions. And students who qualify for Title I services would also be considered in this third tier. And we'll go into each tier now and discuss a little more what each tier means and what the strategies are that are used within those groups of students. So tier 1 again is your classroom level interventions. It's about 80 to 90% of your students. So most of your students will fit into this category, and it's what you do in the classroom that will help support them to become proficient readers. So this is done by differentiating instruction, which a lot of times is giving students texts that are at their level of reading. So give them different books to read or the same book just written at a different level of reading ability for the students. We use Accelerated Reader, which is AR, to help with that, and students know how to choose their books according to their Lexile level. There's also small group reading instruction where We use that universal screener and progress monitoring data to group students into their ability level groups, and they will work with the teacher on their reading instruction, and they can focus on specific skills that they need to work on developing. There are also learning centers, which is often incorporated with the small group reading instruction. While one group is working with the teacher, the other students in their groups will be doing different activities that are all focused on literacy and different strategies for the students. Tier two is your explicit instruction. That's 5 to 10% of the students, and that's outside of that normal classroom instruction. So as I mentioned before, the screeners are just your snapshot. They're the first step. So they just say, hey, something's wrong. There's a red flag here. The student isn't at the level that they should be at. But it doesn't necessarily tell you what's wrong. So we use diagnostic assessments to figure out what's actually wrong and what that student needs in order to be successful. So once those diagnostic assessments are given and we get a better idea of how the student is doing and what they need more help with, then we can provide specific instruction for those skills. And that consists of either small group or one-on-one instruction, depending on the skills that the students need to be working on during our designated intervention time, which happens daily. Tier three strategies are, again, tier three is your intensive intervention. So only 1 to 5% of your students are in this group. And these students receive one-on-one instruction with either the special education teacher or the Title I teacher. Oftentimes they have a separate curriculum, separate reading series that they're using, and it's working on gaps in their education. So skills that they didn't get previous grade levels, or that they have not developed as much as they need to in order to understand the current skills. So often students are working on decoding fluency instead of working on comprehension. So now we're going to talk about how we will help our struggling readers in the future and what we've put in place and what we will be putting in place to bring that 24% of students who are not proficient into the proficiency range. We do this by a variety of ways. The first one is professional development. All of our elementary teachers are currently involved in an intensive professional development cycle. They work extensively on literacy. They've been really digging into the teaching standards, understanding what they're supposed to be teaching, when they're supposed to be teaching it, what it looks like, how it transfers from one year to another, and they've been developing their classroom lessons based on all that information. The AEA, which is the education agency professionals, are providing a lot of the training that our teachers are receiving. We are part of the Grantwood AEA, so they come in and we have reading specialists and literacy coaches coming in, working with our teachers, observing their classrooms, and providing specific feedback on what they can do to better help our students. We also had a literacy class offered in the fall for recertification credit, and several of our elementary teachers took part in that professional development. We also have weekly PLC meetings, and teachers essentially meet weekly with their grade level teams. They review their assessment data, they share strategies with each other, they talk about what's been working, what hasn't been working. Um, they know each other's students, so they can talk about um, individual students and what strategies work. They can talk about ideas that they've tried and what's worked with some of their students, what hasn't worked with their students, what they can change, what they need to continue to work on. And they also group students for intervention in their small group instruction. We also do classroom observations. Our instructional coach observes and or models instruction on a weekly basis in classrooms. So um, teachers can request that the instructional coach comes in anytime, but the instructional coach makes sure that she gets in weekly to observe. And when they talk about how the lesson went, potential strategies to use in the classroom, the instructional coach will often model new strategies before the teacher incorporates them into their classroom so that the teacher can see how that strategy is used, what it looks like, and can then use it with confidence with the students. We also do peer observations on a weekly basis where grade level teachers will watch each other and they will also watch other grade level teachers so that they can see um, grade levels above and below them and the strategies being used, especially at the grade levels below them when there are struggling learners needing to work on skills that students did not understand, not achieve proficiency in at previous levels. Finally, the principal and the curriculum director perform walkthroughs during literacy instruction. This is not done on a weekly basis, more on a bi-weekly or monthly basis, um, as they are not as available as the instructional coach or the other teachers, but they schedule those walkthroughs so the teacher knows that they're coming and they can get feedback on how they're doing with their literacy instruction. We also have several classroom volunteers come in to help struggling students. We're fortunate to be able to have junior high and high school students come down throughout the day to read with students, and community members also volunteer their time to come in and read with students. This is a really great program to have because so many of our students can use that one-on-one time with an adult, and we just can't provide that with the classroom teacher. So having volunteers come in and just give students more time to read out loud and work on their reading skills has been a huge benefit to our school. Finally, the summer reading program is something that we will be implementing per the ELI requirement. So we will identify students from our spring universal screening results and select students to attend our reading program from that. And that reading program will include research-based reading instruction. We will train our teachers on those strategies, and so they will be fully prepared to teach the program. They will have their curriculum laid out ahead of time, and having the summer reading program will allow for additional screening and progress monitoring for our struggling students. Thank you, and I hope you have a better understanding of why we are focusing on reading and what we're doing to help our struggling readers. Thank you.